focus for a lot of the efforts coming out of DC have been focused on some smaller businesses through the Small Business Administration and the Paycheck Protection Program, which allocates grants, loans that will convert into grants if small businesses keep employees on their payrolls. And we are getting new updates out of how the new $310 billion that was reallocated to that effort is being handed out now. The update as of yesterday, we're pacing ahead of that original $350 billion funding that came through first. It was exhausted in 13 days. So potentially this money, this round of funding might go even quicker. For more on that, I want to bring on our next guest, friend of the show and Shark Tank host, Barbara Corcoran, joins us again here. And Barbara, you had been kind of giving us the updates in the way that your companies, your businesses have been navigating the PPP, and it didn't sound like they were having much luck. So what's the update on that front, and any change in your take on the way that this program has struggled to get money into the hands of small business owners?
Well, in the first round of funding, I had 38 entrepreneurs apply for PPP funding, and 4 got it. And when I look at the profile of the 4 who got it, they were the largest businesses that I've invested in. Not large by large business standards. They're businesses that employ 200 people to 15 people. But these are the businesses that were doing well anyway. They certainly needed the money, but they had the best banking contact, and most of them applied regionally to a small bank, and that's how they got their hands on the money. But the balance of the people are still waiting to hear about the money. They're in dire straits needing the money, and they're hoping that they could hold out until they get some cash in their hands.
Yeah, we had President Obama's former SBA head on the show earlier this week, and she was highlighting a couple of things about how she was surprised how this program was taken. She was saying that banks didn't necessarily need to be in the process because the IRS and the government already knows how much is being paid in taxes, knows how much these businesses have in terms of payroll. And she was basically saying that we didn't need banks to be stuck in the middle here and profiting off of this process. I'd be curious to get your take on that, maybe in terms of, how complex maybe the process has been for applying for the aid, and how it could have been more similar to what we saw on the stimulus check front, where, maybe checks were just handed out to these companies directly from the government to help meet payroll needs.
I agree with her entirely in that assessment. Because of my witnessing a lot of things happening during the 2-week period. The large banks who put their most premium customers in first place. And who's a premium customer with a large bank? Someone who has a credit line. And why a credit line? Because the banks make the most money off of a credit line. So those guys got put first in line. The large banks control the allocation of that money much more than the small banks. They're listened to harder. And so if you were working with a large bank and you had the right connection, you got the money. And that's why I think it just added another layer of unfairness to the whole thing. Do the little banks get it? The big banks get it? Remove that and give it directly to the people. I think a lot of that hardship would have been avoided.
Yeah, and a lot of the banks are saying they didn't really necessarily put larger corporations first, but we did hear from, the guidance out of Washington, D.C. about, small businesses, sole props basically hold off on applying. So there was kind of, even if there wasn't necessarily favoring some of these companies, if you listen to the banks, there was, different advice coming out of Washington, D.C., depending on the size of these companies as well. So there are a lot of questions there. Of course, we've seen a lot of lawsuits filed. But you do raise a point about how some bigger companies are navigating all this. We've been getting updates from the leadership of some of the companies out there. You've shared with us in the past some very interesting thoughts about Elon Musk and the way that he operates Tesla. On the earnings call that we heard from them, he did weigh in on the way that these lockdowns that have, imposed problems for small and large businesses might be not the right way to go. I want to play a little clip of what he said on the Tesla earnings call yesterday, calling some of these measures fascist. I'm going to play that and get your take on the other side. Here's what he had to say.
The extension of the shelter-in-place, or frankly, I would call it forcibly imprisoning people in their homes against all their constitutional rights, that's my opinion, and breaking people's freedoms in ways that are horrible and wrong, and not why people came to America or built this country.
Yeah, so you called it, a violation of constitutional rights to keep people at home. Of course, we know the health reasons for why this is being done, but he does raise issue with the way that if people want to leave their home, they shouldn't be arrested for it and everything like that. Of course, he also runs Tesla. He's running a business here, and he's called his workers back into the factories in California. But what's your take on his take on all this, and maybe that the government might be going too far here?
Well, I think to ignore the health aspect of this is just downright crazy. But to his credit, he has a right to rant. He's had a profitable first quarter, right? And his stock went up by, I think, 9% right on the heels of that rant. And it's what we expect of him to speak his mind. I also think what wasn't mentioned and might have added a little salt to that wound is in the state of California, where his factory is, they loosened up the restrictions on many businesses. One of them that was totally released was the construction industry. And I gotta believe he looks at guys building a building neck and neck, hammering nails side by side, and compares that to his factory workers hammering nails and putting the cars together, and wonders to himself, is this fair? I mean, why can't my factory open, but that construction project could go forward? So I get where he would be a little bit annoyed. Whether or not it's against American rights, I think the first American right we all have is to protect our citizens. And I think that's sorely lacking in his assessment of it. Can he really protect people from getting ill? If he can and he can prove it, why not? But I don't think he mentioned that very essential piece.
No, I mean, that is kind of the key question mark here, too. And it's not just, I mean, you talk about factory lines, it's not just for automakers, but it's also for the food supply that we've seen in this country as well. A lot of concerns about that, because you look at Tyson and Smithfield, some of the largest producers of meat in this country. And right now you have the president saying we're going to have, the DPA, invoke the DPA and make sure that we can keep those factories open because it's important. But there are a lot of questions about how you keep these workers safe. And I guess until you answer those, in your mind as a business owner, that becomes question number one before you can actually think about opening back up.
You know, Zach, there was a great ray of hope in LA because the mayor now has enough tests in LA to test all of the citizens there as frequently as they want to be tested. I don't know really how that happens. I want to read up on it. But if that could happen, I mean, if a factory owner like Elon Musk could have everybody tested before he lets them back into the factory, I mean, everybody would be comfortable. Everybody would be on his side going in there. But I'm just wondering myself, why LA suddenly has tests for every citizen to take multiple tests, and why the rest of the country can't seem to finesse making that happen.
That's a very good question. And it's one that I think a lot of people are asking themselves out there as we continue to track the way that states reopen here and try and get testing in place.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.